Welcome everybody. As I said, my name is Jules Danskin. I work with Charco. So we are going to be talking about this fantastic novel from Daniel Saldaña París, which has been translated by Christina MacSweeney. We're very excited to have Chloe with us moderating today, and I think it's going to be a really fascinating discussion. As I said, we're going to have a discount code for you and also reveal the winner of our origami competition at the very end of the event. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Carolina, who's going to introduce our speakers for today, and then we're going to launch into the conversation. Please do interact in the chat. At the end, Chloe is going to be asking questions that you pose to our speakers. So if you put all of those into the chat, then you may well get your question read out. But unfortunately, there is no audio participation in this event, but I'm sure you're all going to really enjoy it. So sit back, enjoy. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the director of Charco Press, Carolina Orloff. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Jules, and hi, everybody here. Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, wherever you are, even you, Daniel, cheers, and welcome to another Charco event. Slanche, as they say, I think, right here. Jules, correct me. So it's a great honor to have you all here in another virtual launch of a Charco book, and it's an amazing honor to have not only the author, but the translator and another author here with us today to talk about our most recent publication, Ramifications. So I'm going to do just a brief introduction to each one of our speakers today. We've got obviously Daniel, who's born in Mexico City, and he's an essayist and poet and also a translator, I believe. And he's written 2 novels, of which Ramifications is the second one. The first one's called Among Strange Victims, Entre Extrañas Víctimas, ¿sí? ¿Correcto? Well, you can correct me later. En medio de Extrañas Víctimas. Yes. And Ramifications is originally called El Nervio Principal. It's a bit different in Spanish, which I've got here. El Nervio Principal, published in 2018, which has put him in a wonderful position of being certainly one of the most interesting voices in Mexican, if not Latin American literature today. He has published a couple of poetry collections, and he's also participated in several anthologies. In 2017, he was elected by the Hay Festival as one of the Bogota 39 authors, which is a group of the most interesting, I'd say, kind of context-changing authors in Latin America today under the age of 40. He's been all over the place as a writer in residence. He can tell us more about that. And most recently, he has been awarded the Eccles Center and Hay Festival Writers Award with Chloe. So hopefully they can tell us more about that, just last year, before the world changed. We also have his translator, Christina MacSweeney, who received in 2016 the Valle-Inclán Prize for her translation of Valerio Liselli's The Story of My Teeth, and her translation of Daniel's first novel, Among Strange Victims, was finalist of the 2017 Best Translated Book Award in the US. She's an iconic translator. I don't have enough good words to describe her. So it's an honor to have her here today, but also to be working with her in Charco. And this is not going to be her only book with us, so maybe she'll tell us more about her work today. And finally, we've got Chloe, who's Chloe Aridjis, who's a Mexican author based in London, and she's the author of 3 novels, which are called Book of Clouds, which won amazingly the London's National Gallery, and Sea Monsters, which recently received the Ben Faulkner Award for Fiction. And I read, and I'd love to hear more about this, that you remember, Chloe, of the XR Writers Rebel group, who focus on addressing the climate emergency and species extinction. And I didn't know that, and I'd love to know more about that if we have time. So I'll shut up now, and with much further ado, we'll leave these three wonderful minds to tell us more about Ramifications. Thank you.
Hello everybody. So I think Chloe's microphone is still on mute. So meanwhile, I can say hello to everyone, and thank you for joining in. And I see some familiar faces there, which makes me very happy. Hello, Danny, Theon, nice to see you all. And Chloe, it's your microphone.
I think it's
Okay.
Yeah, my cat was meowing a lot, so I muted it, but now it's in another room. So now it's wonderful to be doing this, and I've admired the Charco Press books since they began coming out, and then with Daniel, as of last year, it's an evolving, wonderful dialogue across the ocean, and then, of course, an excellent translator too. So I'm very happy to be doing this, but it is my first time moderating, so in case anything goes a bit funny, that's But I thought we could start with each of you reading a small passage from the book. Maybe Daniel first in Spanish and then Christina in English, or is that how you do it?
Yeah, sure. That's okay. So this is just the first couple of pages of the novel. Teresa se fue un martes al mediodía. No recuerdo exactamente qué mes era, pero debía de ser finales de julio o principios de agosto, porque mi hermana y yo seguíamos de vacaciones. Yo odiaba quedarme al cuidado de Mariana, que me ignoraba sistemáticamente durante todo el día, encerrada en su cuarto, con la música puesta a volúmenes que incluso a mí, un niño de 10 años, me parecían insensatos. Por eso resentí el hecho de que ese martes mi mamá se levantara de la mesa al terminar la comida y anunciara que iba a salir. Cuida a tu hermano, Mariana, dijo con aire seco. En general, ella hablaba siempre así, sin modular apenas, como una computadora que da instrucciones o una persona en el espectro del autismo. A veces todavía me da por imitarla frente a nadie y no descarto que escribir esto sea, de alguna forma, un esfuerzo por encontrar en la escritura los ecos de su voz monótona. Teresa, mi madre, se despidió de mí dándome un beso en la cabeza y luego de Mariana, que recibió el beso en la mejilla sin inmutarse ni devolverlo. Cuando llegue su papá, le dicen que hay una carta para él en el buró, nos dijo desde la puerta, en el mismo tono robótico. Luego salió y cerró con llave. No llevaba más que su bolsa, la bolsa de cuyo tamaño se burlaba mi padre cada vez que salíamos. ¿Qué tanto llevas ahí? Parece que te vas a ir de campamento. Esa noche llegó mi padre y leyó la carta. Luego se sentó con nosotros en la sala. Mi hermana estaba viendo videos musicales mientras yo intentaba hacer origami y nos explicó que mamá se había ido. De campamento, pensé. Un martes de julio o agosto de 1994, ella, mi madre, Teresa, se fue de campamento.
Teresa walked out one Tuesday around midday. I can't remember exactly which month, but it must have been either the end of July or the beginning of August, because my sister and I were still on holiday. I always hated being left in the care of Mariana, who systematically ignored me the whole day, barricaded in her bedroom with music playing at a volume that, even to me, a boy of 10, seemed ridiculous. So that Tuesday, I resented it when Mum got up from the table after lunch and announced that she was going out. Look after your brother, Mariana, she said in a flat voice. That was the way she generally spoke, with hardly any intonation, like a computer giving instructions or someone on the autism spectrum. Even now, when no one else is around, I sometimes imitate her, and it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that writing this is, in some form, an effort to find an echo of that monotone voice in the written word. Teresa, my mother, kissed the crown of my head and then turned to Mariana, who received her farewell peck on the cheek without the least show of emotion or any attempt to return the gesture. When your dad gets home, tell him there's a letter for him on his nightstand, she said from the door, in the same robotic voice. Then she left, turning the key behind her. She had no luggage besides the large tote bag my father used to make wisecracks about whenever we went anywhere together. Just what have you got in there? It looks like you're going camping. When he got back that evening, my father read the letter. Then he sat with us in the living room. My sister was watching music videos while I was trying to make an origami figure, and explained that Mum had gone away. Camping, I thought. One Tuesday in July or August 1994, she, my mother, Teresa, went camping.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, it's. I kept thinking, because this summer I'd read Daniel's novel and loved it in Spanish, and then reading it again now in English. After this summer, I rewatched, well, probably my favorite film of all time, which is Bergman's Fanny and Alexander. And, you know, Alexander's 10 years old, and it's a film about childhood reverie and how the little boy creates these magic, or he creates, or he envisions and projects into these magical spaces to protect himself also from, well, after his father's death, and then his mother marries an evil bishop, and this lack of authority and sort of almost sense of orphandom in his life. But I was just thinking, I just kept thinking of it when I was reading Daniel's book again. And Teresa is, of course, you know, the ghost who's haunting the novel, but also a crisis of authority and the father who doesn't really ever live up to being a father entirely. But I'd love, Daniel, for you to say more about just all these different spaces that he creates, and sanctuaries, and the fragility of them, or how porous they are, and how you came up with all these different forms of childhood reverie.
Yes, sure. So thank you for the question. Fanny and Alexander is a movie that I love too. It's really one of my all-time favorites, among with other Bergman's movies for sure. Yeah, so I wanted to write something about childhood, and I usually have a very bad memory. I don't remember much from my own childhood, but I do remember that, like, the idea of creating all these, like, not only spaces but also little mythologies around menial stuff, you know, like just coming up with huge stories and myths about whatever, about the small things in your room, and about the relationships between the grown-ups. And I had like these very clear mythologies and very complicated and convoluted stories that stayed with me for a long time, and then slowly I began to forget about them. And in the process of writing the novel, I remembered some of them, and I used them as a model for this crazy imagination of the character, of the narrator. But it's not only a book about childhood, but also deals a lot with memory. So I also wanted to reflect on the fact that we sometimes create those mythologies and those spaces in the present time. Like maybe I'm projecting all of that into the child's life, and at the same time, it's also just the grown-up trying to make a sense of his whole life and his history. So in a way, I think that we create those myths as children, but then we recreate them as grown-ups, and we also polish them in a way. So maybe there was a rough version of those imaginations, and then when you grow up, you come back to those ideas, and then you remember, like, oh, I remember I used to have this magic capsule, and you keep on building those myths. So that was one of the ideas I wanted to deal with in the book.
Yeah, the zero luminosity capsule. And, and the idea of course, between this, opacity or obfuscation and the boy's search for some sort of illumination within all the darkness the mother left. So I also wondered whether that was based on that was an elaboration of a real game or invention you had as a child, or was it?
Yes, most of that aspect of the story of the novel is somehow autobiographical. Not the main plot. I mean, my mother never went to Chiapas, and my father is thankfully a very different guy from the father of the novel. But the kid's imagination and the kid's inner world, and how he deals with the outside world and the things he perceives as threats. This idea of finding refuge in not only books, but like the idea of order, because I think both literature and origami go in that direction, in the direction of finding an order and giving the order and the structure a sense of refuge. So I think that part is kind of autobiographical, although my outside world was much less chaotic and fearful than the children, than the kid in the book. But yeah, some of my experience is there somehow.
There might be a few more questions to return to that. But I also felt like we could talk about paper for a long time, and all the different forms that paper takes in the book as a vehicle, a vessel, a map of errors, just this beautiful cartography that you create. And I can't remember the exact sentence, but with origami, just how every fold, every error is there in the folds and the history of the figure. And that's something I do remember from the few times I tried, is that the indentation is there forever, even if you undo it. So so just the idea of paper as letters, notes, origami, notebooks, death certificate, but this documentation of life and almost this living archive that the boy is just extremely aware of, but seems to be the one, in the act of writing later, or looking back on his life, on his childhood, but just this engagement with the medium.
Yes, of course. That was very important for me, because I think I mostly write on paper. I always use notebooks, and I always have a notebook at hand. And I love everything that goes into writing a notebook. And I wanted to have a character that was not a writer in a professional sense, but that needed to write. Because I think there's, like, for me, there's something simpler, like before being a career or before being something I do for a living. Writing is also a way of dealing with myself and my inner world, and my way of just being alive. Like I always carry a notebook, and I'm always taking notes, and paper is very important to me in that respect. And so I wanted to find a way to make an homage to paper in that sense. And I thought that origami was a good metaphor for it as well.
Yeah. And and when the frog origami, when he tries to make the frog, and then I began thinking about the house as this sort of quite unstable ecosystem, and frogs, of course, are sort of indicative. They're like the barometer of a healthy ecosystem, a balanced ecosystem in nature, and how even if the origami frog comes out crooked, and how the boy keeps trying to make the cranes, but also the frog
I had no idea about the frogs being the barometer of a healthy ecosystem. No, I had no idea, but I love that reading. I mean, it's amazing. It's, yeah, and I love frogs, and yeah.
Yeah, because I just love the way you, a child, just so interesting, because the child's habitation of space, and then it's the older self looking back on the child's habitation of space, and then later in the book returning to that space, and just how as a child every space depends so much on your mood, whether it's night or day, whether you're alone or in the company of others. And I thought you just so beautifully captured that. And while we're turning to what of course, the act of remembering, and how as a novel progresses, it becomes more layered and complex, the act of remembering, and the inaccuracy of memory, and how memories sort of, just this, fabrication, reconstruction, and memory, and whether memory is sort of in the service of some sort of fabrication, but I wish if you could say more about that, and what you say about the destructive act of remembrance, because one associates so much with something generative, but actually you're right, it's well, you can say.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was something I read at some point. I started just reading through some like popular science articles around memory and how memory works at a neurological level. Mm-hmm. And at some point I came across this article, I think it was, or maybe it was a podcast, I don't know, which talked about how we remember, and through the act of remembering, each memory is distorted in a way. So every time you remember a particular fact or a particular scene in your life, you add something to it, or maybe you twist a little bit of it, and in that way, the memories that you have like more close to your heart, the ones that you remember more often, are in a way the more distorted ones, because you keep going back to them, and so you keep distorting them each time. So I thought that was fascinating, because as you said, we tend to accept a certain degree of fiction when we talk about memory. It's true that nobody thinks that memory is like absolutely loyal to the original fact or the original scene, but we usually tend to think in memory as a way of creating a new interpretation of the world. But it's also destroying an interpretation, and destroying and slowly distorting the original experience. So I thought that was fascinating in terms of how to work with an unreliable character, because if you have an unreliable narrator, so if you have a narrator who is remembering his childhood, and every memory is somehow distorted to a certain point, to a certain degree, then it's obviously impossible to know if what he's telling is actually what happened. And I wanted that to be a part of the novel in a way, that doubt to be there, and just it's not that central to the plot. I mean, it's not one of the, because in the end he keeps telling the story. He's not immobilized by the idea of being unfaithful or unreliable. He keeps on telling the story, even though he suspects that maybe it's not entirely faithful. No, so I want.
And then, of course, you mentioned as a boy he loved the choose your own adventure game. So then you wonder how much is he ever choosing it. And I wanted to ask Christina also, how does memory, as a translator, how does apart from, of course, memory of a language, but memory of, say, Mexico City, if you've been there, and just that residual memory of maybe other, Daniel's first book, or other Mexican books you've translated, and how does memory come into the act of translation? I don't know if it's an easy question to answer. But.
No, it's a really interesting question, actually. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time in Mexico and in Mexico City. Sadly, not for a little while now, but yeah. So, I mean, when I'm translating books which are set in the city, then I am, you know, I have that kind of visual memory going on. And in fact, I was saying to Danielle that I actually walked through the neighborhood where, you know, the child grows up, Educación, you know, before I'd read this book, you know, but I kind of, because I just like heading out and walking. So all those kind of things, the feel of the city, you know, and I've known it. I think I first went to Mexico City in 1986, so I've kind of known it through a lot of changes, and so I could take myself back to, you know, sort of 1994 and feel how the city was then, which is very different to the way it is now. And yeah, I thinking about Danielle's work, then I'm not sure how much I could say memory involves in the translation of this one, because Among Strange Victims is a very, very different sort of book, you know, so, you know, and I'm translating the book that I'm working with, but maybe it comes in of, because Danielle and I spent time together in a residency in upstate New York at the very end of the process of writing Among Strange Victims. And yeah, the memory of Danielle's voice, the way he thinks about things, those are very much in my mind as well. So I think that's the best I can say on memory there.
And how collaborative, say, was this translation? Did you have a back and forth throughout or towards the end? Or?
I think, well, because Danielle actually sent me the novel in process. So I read the first 50 pages and then I got a bit more and a bit more. So, you know, sort of, that was really lovely to sort of be there kind of evolving with the novel, if you know what I mean, and great. And then towards the end, you were very involved, I think, Danielle, in, yeah, maybe you'd like to talk about that sort of.
Yes. Well, first of all, the thing is that I trust Christina as a reader more than anyone else, because she's such a great translator, and to be a great translator, you really need to be a very clever reader. So that's why I always share with Christina the stuff I write even before I have like the first full draft, because I know she's not only very generous but also very true, and she's gonna tell me what she thinks, and she's gonna make important comments and some maybe give some advices. And that's what happened with this novel. I actually wrote, yeah, I think it was like 50 pages or so, and I sent them to Christina. She said it worked. I mean, she didn't say throw it all away and start over. So that was a good beginning, and I knew I had to keep on writing. And then when we were working on the final details of the translation, well, she usually sends me several questions and queries regarding the certain words or expressions, or trying to precise like a few meanings throughout the book, and I respond to those. We go over the Word document several times, and we discuss a few words. Yeah, how to choose between one or the other. And yeah, it's a very interesting process, because I always discover things through her reading. Like I always notice things about my own book that I didn't know until Christina read it, and that's very fulfilling and interesting.
Well, one of the great things about translating Daniel is that he's so precise, you know, in his word choice and things like that, you know, sort of, it's an absolute delight to translate his work, because, you know, you just feel that you're being given a sort of perfect product to work with. So there's not usually many mistakes or anything like that.
That's the poet in him too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I was curious about the title, because I think both titles work very well. I'm curious whether you, and they both have some sort of centrifugal suggestion of some centrifugal movement, but one's more figurative than the other. So I'm just curious, did you discuss it? Did one of you choose it? And because the word ramifications is in the book, and so
it's not in the Spanish. It got a little added. Because the title in Spanish is El nervio principal, which is a botanical term, so that vein that goes up the middle of a leaf, and in English that translates as midrib. Which is not the greatest title for a book. It doesn't really bring out any kind of images in your mind. So, I was sort of trying to avoid anything that had the word vein in it, because I thought really then, Mexican writer veins, we've got a book about drugs. So, and I had to start thinking kind of literally, of other things to do with leaves. And then I sent a sort of list to Daniel, not telling him which my favorite was, which happened to be Ramifications. And he liked that one too. So, and I just added, I think in about 3 or 4 places in the novel, I just added this idea of the midrib with the veins branching out or ramifying or whatever.
It works beautifully.
And I loved it. I loved it because it also adds an interpretation, like a connotation to the title that was not in the original. So it's also like it puts something else in the center, like it emphasizes a different side of the book that was not emphasized in the original title, and I like that.
Yeah, because I loved all the discussions or the mentions of symmetry and asymmetry, and then I was wondering whether less consciously there was any association with the symmetry of the more conventional sort of family unit of mother, father, brother, sister, and this utopian vision of symmetry, which doesn't maybe exist. And well, I don't know if you want to say more about symmetry or asymmetry in the book.
Yes, sure. Those oppositions. Is this working? Because I feel like I'm not on speaker. Am I on speaker mode now? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, those oppositions were in the very center of the book from the beginning. Like I wanted to write a very structured novel in a way. So I was writing something very different before, a very different kind of book, which was more ironic, humorous, with different characters, different voices and narrators. And at some point I got lost in that novel and I couldn't finish it. I had to leave that novel unfinished. And I decided to write something completely different and more structured in every possible way. So I decided to work with a literal like midrib structurally in the book, which is the journey of the kid when he goes off to Chiapas to search for his mother. I'm sorry if I'm giving up too much about the plot, but I hope it's not. I'm not going to reveal the final twist, at least. So the journey works as sort of a midrib in the way that it divides the book in two, and it's like the way he is before the journey and then after the journey, which is a very common structure from adventure books. No, there's a journey and the hero comes out of the journey changed and yeah, a new person. In this case, he's maybe more traumatized after the journey than before. But that was like the central structure I wanted to work with, and then from then build a series of oppositions and symmetries or false symmetries, like masculine and feminine, and boyhood and adulthood, and right and left, both politically and even spatially.
Yeah.
And so it's a very neurotic novel, I have to say, in a way, because this idea of like structuring the narrated universe to such a degree that everything is divided in right and left, and right and wrong, and everything, makes it like very structured in many ways. And then towards the end, some of those opposites and some of those oppositions start to melt a little bit, and they crumble down, and he realizes that it's impossible really to make such distinctions and to experience life in such a structured way. So yeah, it's part of the process of writing it.
This one, yeah, one character I liked a lot was that slightly picaresque one of Rat, of the rat, and that idea too, that as a child of or that age, when you look up to someone who's maybe not that many years older than you, but there is so much they become demystified later in life, unless they turn into someone extraordinary. But there's so often, as you grow up, that demystification of people you looked up to at the time, and that character. How would you, for you, what I was curious, because one meets him at different stages, Rat, and what would you say he well, I mean, in a sort of prosaic question, but what would you say he represents in the book or to the boy, that character?
I think in a way he's like the personification of the neighborhood in many ways, because I wanted to write about Mexico City, but not, I mean, through the eyes of the kid. So when you are a kid, you are not really experiencing the city as a whole. Mm-hmm. You are mostly at home, and you know and you see the people around you, and then maybe when you get a bit older, you start to relate with people in your neighborhood. So he's kind of like the personification of that level of the city, which is the neighborhood. He's like a famous guy, but only in this small peripheral neighborhood. He's not truly that important, but to a kid of that age, he's like a character. He's like a very well-known character that everybody talks about. And as soon as the kid leaves the neighborhood and starts meeting other people, he realizes that maybe this guy is just like any other guy from the neighborhood, no? But yeah, I wanted to talk about that process of demythification, as you said. It's really funny, and I think, yeah, it's a pretty universal experience in a way.
Yeah. And the word you mentioned towards the beginning of about the create of myth, and there was something, of course, especially when the Zapatistas, there was this myth sort of created around them, and then the mother went to join them and suddenly became this mythical figure in the family. But and then the father, who was very, very open to NAFTA, to the North American Free Trade Agreement. Yeah. But I was thinking a lot about, I remember when I was reading the book, how even as a young person, you sense that NAFTA and this opening of Mexico to the outside world, and even though people were, well, maybe not us, but people were excited about it in the sense of possibility and economic and more global, but there was that sense of loss also, and that fear of what was going to be lost and traded in for that opening up to. But so I thought I love the way you just would sometimes zoom in and out to what was happening in Mexico, these major, because the 90s were, of course, very turbulent times in Mexico. And I don't know if you just want to say a little more about that, or maybe not, or yeah.
No, sure, yes. I think, especially not only the 90s, but especially 94 was this very turbulent year for Mexican history. It was the Zapatistas, the NAFTA signature, and then the assassination of Colosio. So even as a kid, you would listen about it all the time. Like everybody was talking about the Zapatistas and whether or not the NAFTA deal was a good thing for Mexico. So it was in every conversation everywhere, at least in the circles that I knew at the time. Both of my parents were and are still like hardcore leftists slash communists. So there was like no discussion that the NAFTA deal was a terrible thing. But still, like there was also at the same time, like we as children could feel like a bittersweet side to it, because all of a sudden we had a lot of things that were not around it around before, no, like products, all kinds of things from the States, even CDs and music and books and movies that all of a sudden started flowing in from the States, and it really changed the landscape, the cultural landscape of Mexico, and it definitely had a good side to it. At the same time, it had like a terrible effect on the economy and the agriculture in certain parts of Mexico. So yeah, but I wanted to show all of that from the point of view of a kid, like even from the height of a kid. Like I remember looking up when people talked about all of that, you know, like this feeling of I'm facing up and listening people talk about the Zapatistas and stuff. And I wanted to reproduce that feeling of just how magnified everything seemed from that point of view, and how distorted, because it's a literally a different perspective, no? When you see things from down, from a down perspective. So I wanted to reproduce that at several levels in the book.
And the novel you're writing now is set in what decade? Is it or different?
The novel I'm writing now is current times. Is more or less. I mean, not current times pandemic, but pre-pandemic current times. But it also,
oh, sorry.
It also deals with history even more than Ramifications. It's set in Cuernavaca, but it's like the history of Cuernavaca, which is a small city near Mexico City. The history of Cuernavaca interrupts the plot all the time, and it's constantly referred to.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm just seeing if there's questions.
I don't think there's.
So what stage with this novel you're writing now, what stage will you send Christina the first 50 pages?
Very soon, I hope.
Yes, soon. But actually, before that, we are working on another thing, because I finished writing an essay collection, like a personal essay collection.
Oh.
And Christina is translating a few of those. Like she's translated a couple of them already. One was published recently in the UK in the Arts Desk, was it called?
Yeah.
Arts Desk. And then we are working, well, she is working, and I am just answering some questions around another essay centered in Montreal, where I lived for a few years, and I wrote something about it.
Yeah, this is a wonderful one, I think.
Thank you.
So is the idea to slowly translate the whole collection, or one essay at a time, depending on?
There's no, I don't think there's like a plan for it to be published in English yet, but some of the essays have been already been published. I mean, some of them I wrote them years ago. There was one that I wrote about Cuernavaca and was published in Bond magazine maybe 4 years ago or so. Yeah. And then the more recent essays, she's doing them in English. English as well. So.
I look forward to, you have to send me.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll send you the Spanish version first and
Great.
Eventually the English one.
So Tobias asks, was the twist ending planned from the beginning, or did it occur to you during the writing? And or with the influence of your collaboration with Christina?
The final twist, no, I didn't know it from the beginning. When I started writing, I like writing without all the information. Like I write, and I love to discover things about the plot and the characters throughout the process of writing. Because otherwise, like, if I know everything, like I don't see the point in writing it. Like if I already know the ending, why would I write it? Like for me, writing is a process of discovering the rest, the missing pieces of the puzzle as well. So I didn't know it from the beginning, but it didn't came from the collaboration from Christina. It was just something that I came up with at some point. Or I had some clues. I knew from the beginning that he was in bed and he was remembering, but I didn't know why. And from the beginning, I knew that answering that question, like why is he in bed, was a central part of the book. So it was like an X that I had to, like in math, when you have to find out the meaning of that X, it was an X in my process. But I think I was maybe through the middle part of it when I decided what the ending was gonna be.
It's a very melancholic ending. But who doesn't like melancholic endings? Here's a question for Christina from Deidre. I'm curious about whether you are also a writer, or have you always been focused solely on translation?
No, I've always loved writing. I mean, even as a child, I loved to write. And, sort of I've written, sort of short stories that are just for me and my friends and things like that. And I do even have an unpublished novel, which got one very good rejection. But anyway, so I mean, writing has been always part of my life, reading as well. And so, sort of for me, translation gives me that opportunity to write. I just don't have to think of the plot, which is a real advantage. So, sort of, I think, I don't think any, a translator who doesn't love the act of writing, having a pencil in your hand and putting words on paper, that it would be very difficult to be a literary translator in that. So yeah, it's lifelong.
And at what stage did you learn Spanish, when you were young, or at university, or afterwards? Or?
It's been also, I took Spanish when I was at secondary school. And I think it got left for a while, but I've always been very interested in Latin American literature. So sort of, I think I came back to it through the literature. And then I lived in Venezuela for 10 years. So, sort of I had much more opportunity to read in Spanish, and obviously was speaking Spanish the whole time. So yeah, so it sort of came to me, it's just something. I found myself imitating the voices of the authors I was reading, and it struck me, oh, this could be translation actually, when you're writing something that is kind of in the voice of another writer.
Well, here Deidre just writes, well, you are a brilliant translator and you do so much good work for writers and us readers. Your work is vital. Thank you. And then John Pinto writes, Daniel, could you say something about your educational background, science or arts?
Sure, yeah. Well, I studied philosophy in, I don't know what you call in university, in Madrid actually, because part of my family is from Spain. So when I was 18 years old, I moved to Madrid to study philosophy. But other than that, I never pursued like a academic career. So my educational background is pretty limited in general. I started working at a magazine when I was 19 years old as a copywriter, editor, or whatever. And I started doing some translations for the magazine as well when I was around 20 years old. So from then on, I mostly worked full time in magazines or publishing houses, and I think that was my school in a way. Like when you work with literary texts all the time, like you talk to the author and you make suggestions and you edit the text and you end up acquiring the skills, I guess. So now for me it's weird because I deal with my own literature like as an editor as well in many ways. Like it's very hard for me to write. I'm very slow, but once I have like something written, I can work on it and rework it and then add some stuff in the middle and then move it around. So I still have like a very editorial approach to the whole process. And I think that's because of the work I did as an editor for magazines and stuff. And I am still an editor. I work for a poetry magazine here in Mexico City.
But I was going to say, but also as a poet, of course, you pay a lot of attention to structure and rhythm and cadence, and there's probably a lot going on you're not even maybe conscious of when you're writing prose, maybe.
Yes, I have to write aloud. Like I write a paragraph and then I read it aloud, and I make some adjustments and so on. For me, the sound of it is very important, and the rhythm, everything. So that's something we have in common with Christina, because she also has a very phonetical approach to literature, I think. Like she also reads aloud every sentence and every paragraph. Maybe you want to say something?
Yeah. And listening for different rhythms, changes in tempo.
Have you translated poetry too, Christina?
A little. It's something I would like to try and do more of. I mean, I would like to. I love Daniel's poetry, so I would love the opportunity.
So if anyone here wants to publish my poetry in Christina's translation, please send us an email afterwards.
So someone asked, Daniel, could you speak a bit more about the process of writing a childhood trauma and how you found tackling such a challenging subject? Hannah.
Yes. So, I mean, maybe I'm a bit pessimistic, but I always focus on the negative side of my experiences, and with childhood, it happens as well. Like I remember mostly the bad things about being a kid. I also remember some of the good stuff, but mostly the negative side. It kind of sticks. It stays with me stronger. So yeah, I wanted to write about cruelty and how children can be so cruel sometimes, and bullying and all of that. I was bullied for a while when I was a kid, not as viciously as the character in the book, thankfully, but yeah, I experienced that when I was maybe 9 or 8 years old, maybe a bit younger even, and I still remember some of the stuff they did, and it's like I would never treat a person like that. Like children can be like much crueler than grown-ups sometimes. I mean, some grown-ups are pretty bad as well, but yeah, children can be really, really tough, and it's in the moment when you are really in the process of becoming a person, like you are still assimilating, and every experience is formative, and every experience stays with you very, very strongly. So yeah, I wanted to work on that, and it was difficult. Like the couple of scenes that I found very hard to write in the novel are especially those, like when there's a scene when he's on the bus and there's a soldier and the soldier treats him terribly, and he's just a kid and he really doesn't understand what's going on. That scene was particularly hard to write. And then there's a scene of bullying when there's a group of kids and they also treat him pretty roughly, and like they are horrible with him, and that was also very hard to write. But
they were horrible scenes to translate as well.
yes,
and to read the birthday party scene. I was very upset by it too. Yeah.
yes, those were upsetting. But I like that the book has some upsetting scenes. Like I usually write upsetting stuff, so it's not too foreign to my own writing.
Well, my final question would be just more general. How is it being a writer in Mexico now? And, you know, there's a quite tense, uncertain times in Mexico, I think, regardless of what one's politics are. But with what you're writing now, do you address it in any way, or is it a separate sphere?
No, yeah, I think I can't. Yeah, I have to address it somehow. Like, I think it distorts the way I write. Like it's not about the subject for me, but also about the language I use and the way I structure a book, and also about certain subjects. But I would never write like about a politician or the political scene in Mexico, or about a major crime that everybody's talking about. Like, those are not my subjects. I usually work with personal experiences and with a more familiar world and universe. But I think the political sphere is very important in many ways for me, and it definitely comes into play when I am writing, and in the words I choose, in the rhythm, the violence with which I write. I think it's all there. So yes, I address those issues, maybe from a lateral point of view, and I don't think I'm ever gonna write a novel about narcos and you know, like the violence we are seeing in Mexico right now,
Mm-hmm.
because I know there's a lot of people who do it incredibly well, and I wouldn't want to compete with them in any way. That's not my aim, and it's not my territory. But I do find the ways of touching on certain subjects from a lateral point of view, and from another perspective, and through the language and through the use of language mostly. So yeah, like some of the subjects that I deal with and that are very obvious in this book, for example, in Ramifications, like machismo, or you know, like sexism and masculinities, and or toxic masculinities, or whatever you want to call them. Those are some of my subjects that I'm always dealing with and I'm always addressing, and that are also political in a way, but not maybe the like the big narco issue of Mexico. or I'm never gonna write a book about the president or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah. And Christina, do you follow the news in Mexico? Do you read?
Yes, as much as I can. And I think as a translator, it's really interesting the different writers that I represent in England, how they approach these kind of issues. Because I don't think I mean, none of the ones I do would, like Danielle says, you know, sort of write the narco novel. But there's a way in which I think Mexican writing, the best of Mexican writing, really sort of comes at things from an angle, tries to, you know, not just sort of batter you with violence and gory scenes, but it's actually addressing it in a much more subtle way, a more serious way, you know, than, you know, Netflix narco drama type stuff. So I think, you know, what's happening in Mexico literature is just wonderful.
Just going through such a wonderful moment. Well, does anyone have any final questions? We've covered so much ground.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions, Chloe. It's one of the best events I've done. Like, really, you took the time to read it in depth and
yeah, no, I was so happy to.
Come
and
up
I
with really great questions.
Yeah, and just experiencing it again in English after reading it in Spanish last year or this year in January. Well, I can't remember when you gave me the book in Spanish, but now time is such a blur. But
yeah,
it's been I've been so happy to.
It's probably better in English, so you are lucky to have the Christina's translation.
No, thank you, Chloe. Thanks ever such a lot. I mean, you know, sort of great questions, and it's such a pleasure to hear your take on the book as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you both. And should I pass it to Jules now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Chloe. I just want to echo Danielle and Christina saying your questions were just absolutely fantastic. Really thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. We were so excited when Chloe got involved, and I'm sure everyone who's tuned into the event can see why. What fascinating conversation. And I love the warmth between Danielle and Christina. Like, clearly, like, that's a real collaboration, and I think that really came across. So I hope whether you've read the novel already or not, then that's something that you encounter as you pick up the book again. And if you haven't read Ramifications already, I really encourage you all to do so. It's a fantastic novel, and I love the I think in reference to Danielle's previous book, they talked about humour and that kind of thing, whereas I think Ramifications is so serious, as we've talked about, but I love that kind of wry language that runs throughout. I think it's something that makes it really fascinating. So I really hope everyone who hasn't read it yet will go and do so. And you can do so with 20% off for the next 48 hours. Carolina's holding up a copy of the book right now. It's a beautiful book. The design, of course, by Pablo Font, who's made the French flaps. There's a secret design in there as well. So you can go and buy Ramifications or any other individual title. It doesn't include bundles or tote bags. But the code you want to use for the next 48 hours is Origami20. So Origami20. You can go and do that just now. And you'll be supporting a small publisher, which will be lovely. And then the last thing, the honour falls upon me to announce the winner of our origami competition. You may have been following, if you follow us on social media, that we asked people to create an origami creation. As those of you who've read Ramifications will know, origami is quite a central sort of theme throughout. The child uses it as a coping mechanism, and you can see some of here. Hopefully you can all see my screen. It's just some of the creations that people made, and we're just absolutely blown away by the variety. So we have chosen a winner. The winner will get the subscription to Charco's titles for 2021, which we think is quite a nice prize. So we've got a special commendation. The runner-up is this one, lovely, from What Beth's Reading, who did 3 little origami. And I think if you can see there, I hope you can see, if you're on your laptop, there's a little figure here who is holding a copy of what we think is Ramifications. It looks a little bit like the cover, which we just think is incredibly clever. So hats off for that one. That's really amazing. But the unanimous winner is from Away with the Fairy Tale, and I'm sure you can see why. Just the composition there, and there's 3 little cranes, and just lovely and autumnal. Someone's really put an awful lot of thought into it. So well done, Away with the Fairy Tale. You are the winner of our origami competition, and we'll be letting you know shortly if you're not on the Zoom. Okay, so that is us at the end of the event. This will be up on YouTube later, so you can watch it again. There were some really lovely little nuggets of information, and also just a feeling about the book and how it came to be. And it just, all that's left for me to do. And we get to meet Chloe's cat. Hello.
There's Ludwig.
Oh, gorgeous.
You know, that's one of the things I love doing about these Zoom events, is that you get to see everybody, especially cats. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Chloe, Christina, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. Carolina, thank you as well for giving introductions, and thank you all for who asked questions and just for being here. It's been another great event. We'll be letting you know about our final title for 2020 in just a little bit. But for now, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye, stay safe. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.